Hello, and welcome to Somewhere on the Spectrum. This week, I want to make our first addition to a historical Hall of Fame for potential autistic people from the past. Feel free to drop names in the comments of any suggestions you have for our Hall of Fame. In this edition, you might never have heard of her, but in her time, she was a very famous woman, highly sought after writer. Harriet Martineau was born in 1802 in Norwich. She was the sixth of 8 children, and her father's family made cloth. She was highly educated and an avid reader. Throughout her life, Harriet traveled widely across the UK, America, Europe, and even the Middle East. She was a prolific writer of both fiction and nonfiction. She is considered the first woman to write extensively on political economy, as well as writing about feminism and being a fierce abolitionist. All of the reading I'm going to do today comes from Harriet's first book of her autobiography. Written in her early 50s, when Harriet was sure she was going to die, the 2 volumes cover her life and include detailed descriptions of many famous people that she met during that time, including people like William Wordsworth. In fact, she ended up living for another 20 years, and the autobiographies weren't published until after her death in 1876. There are many reasons, I believe, that Harriet belongs in our Hall of Fame. One reason people might disagree, though, is because she was extremely sociable. And I know we're like, a lot of us not so much. However, I propose Harriet became deaf in her teenage years. And I suspect this loss of one sense, and she already tells us that she had very little sense of smell, so 2 senses down, I believe that this loss meant that she wasn't expected to follow conventional social rules, and therefore she got away with a lot. When I think of the autistic people that I've met, I have noticed there are some of them who are not affected by the fear of the social rules. Sometimes they seem quite oblivious to their ever existing. Sometimes they have such self-confidence that it doesn't bother them. And sometimes another different disability gets in their way. It prevents them from recognizing the signals, and they just go about their lives anyway. So that's one of the reasons why I think that Harriet's deafness could perhaps have made it easier for her to be extremely sociable. She wouldn't have had to deal with a lot of the sensory overload that we might have in a similar situation. And she was able to just enjoy her life. Anyway, I want to read 3 short sections from volume 1 that I think demonstrate some experiences many of us will find familiar. This particular bit is about senses and anxiety, and she identifies that she thinks she was about 2. Harriet has an insane memory, by the way. Somebody set me down at the foot of a fir, where I was distressed by the slight rising of the ground at the root, and by the long grass, which seemed a terrible entanglement. I looked up the tree and was scared at its height, and at that of so many others. I was comforted with a fir cone, and then one of the mistaskers caught me up in her arms and kissed me, and I was too frightened to cry till we got away. I was not more than 2 years old when an impression of touch occurred to me which remains vivid to this day. It seems indeed as if impressions of touch were at that age more striking than those from other senses. I say this from observation of others besides myself, for my own case is particular in that matter. Sight, hearing, and touch were perfectly good in early childhood, but I never had the sense of smell, and that of taste was therefore exceedingly imperfect. In this section, we can hear that she has a lot of sensory things. She has her sight, her hearing, and her touch, but she recognizes she doesn't have smell, and her taste is not so good, really. But we can also see in the description, she is noticing everything about her, and she's remembered at this young age. She's remembered all of these things. I think also relevant is this anxiety that's there. And this is really common throughout Harriet's childhood. Not as much later. She becomes a very confident person, but certainly in her childhood, we really can identify and recognize this anxiety. We're going to come back to it soon, where she's afraid of everything. And also this thing about touch. I wonder how many of you are also highly affected by touch. In this section, I really want to look at her sense of justice. I think we can also see some demand avoidance, and again, this lack of self-confidence that so many of us probably relate to. My passion for justice was balked there as much as anywhere. The duties preached were those of inferiors to superiors, while the per contra was not insisted on with any equality of treatment at all. Parents were to bring up their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, and to pay servants due wages. But not a word was ever preached about the justice due from the stronger to the weaker. I used to thirst to hear some notice of the oppression which servants and children had to endure in regard to their feelings, while duly clothed, fed, and taught. But nothing of the sort ever came. Instead, a doctrine of passive obedience, which only made me remorseful and miserable. I was abundantly obedient in act, for I never dreamed of being otherwise. But the interior rebellion kept my conscience in a state of perpetual torture. As far as I can remember, my conscience was never of the least use to me, for I always concluded myself wrong about everything, while pretending entire complacency and assurance. My moral discernment was almost wholly obscured by fear and mortification. So this piece is talking about her experience in church. She does become very, very religious in the beginning, but then later in life, she pretty much abandons it altogether. But this feeling that we hear about here of her passion for justice remains very, very strong throughout her life. Harriet ended up traveling to America during the period when they're kind of arguing about whether slavery should exist or not. And she traveled to the South and she spoke to people all over the country and in the North. And she wrote a lot about this. So there are things that you can find written by her. She really felt very strongly, and she continued to do that about workers' rights and different things during her life period. So this feeling of justice that she had remained very strong in her life. Also, this bit of the teaching of passive obedience, which only made me remorseful and miserable. So even though she acknowledges that she was abundantly obedient in act and never dreamed of being otherwise, there's this burning frustration inside that's like, this is not fair. And that really comes out as a child. She is rebelling quite constantly and always angry and upset about things. She demonstrates this great emotional feelings that a lot of us can identify with. She really talks about that a lot, these big emotions that she had and where did they come from. This one, I want to look at anxiety, shyness, fear of perception. She had a music teacher, a scary music teacher. I should say on their behalf that I, for one, must have seemed a most uncompromising pupil. My wits were so completely scattered by fear and shyness. I could never give a definition for want of presence of mind. I lost my place in class for everything but lessons that could be prepared beforehand. I was always saying what I did not mean. The worst waste of time, energy, money, and expectation was about my music. Nature made me a musician in every sense. I was never known to sing out of tune. I believe all who knew me when I was 20 would give a good account of my playing. There was no music that I attempted that I did not understand and that I could not execute, under one indispensable condition, that nobody heard me. She goes on quite a bit about this very scary music teacher, and the point that she makes is that he was so strict, she became terrified of him and she couldn't produce anything in front of him. So whereas when she's by herself, Her mother is in the next room crying tears of joy, listening to her sing. She's delighting in it. When this music teacher appears, she sounds horrendous because she's so terrified all the time. And definitely, as I said earlier, as a young person, this anxiety and fear was a constant thing in Harriet's life. But also, I think here, this shyness, but also the thing at the end here about nobody heard me, this fear of perception. I wonder how many of us can relate to that fear. For me, I love playing the piano. I don't like anybody to hear me play the piano. I don't want you to hear me play the piano. And one of the reasons that I can do these videos is that you're not here. I like you. I like you a lot. You're very nice. I'm sure you're all delightful. I'm glad you're not in my room with me. So that fear of perception, I think, is very relevant for a lot of us and we can relate to. Harriet, I think really with the music, it was a big part. And certainly in later life, I don't think she had as much issue. She quite happily talks to people that I would be terrified to talk to. She talks to a lot of very famous people at the time. She does speeches. She does a huge amount of writing. And later, when she has to, she strides into Fleet Street to get herself a job with the confidence that I definitely wouldn't have. She was quite an amazing person of her time. She was very famous in her time and also very much self-made woman. So she's quite inspirational, actually. These two autobiographies are the only things that I have read of hers, but I would definitely love to read all of her other work. It's really sad to me how prolific she was, and I had never heard of her. There was a exhibition on at the Art Museum in Ambleside, and she actually used to live in Ambleside, and at the time that she lived there, it was a meeting of minds. There was a lot of really interesting people living there. So the museum was covering the women who lived there at the time. The Arnott sisters are also very, very cool and interesting, as was Dorothy Wordsworth, the sister of William. So yes, it was a very interesting exhibition and I ended up buying quite a few books. I prefer this first one about her childhood because I think it really is very easy to relate to her childhood. Her second book is really a list of names. She talks about everybody that she met. It is really interesting from the abolitionist perspective, and she goes to Egypt, travels around Europe. So it is really, really interesting, but it is a lot of name dropping too. Which is kind of delightful because it's just so like socially unacceptable to name drop, but she just does it straight away. And I think it's telling that she didn't want these books to be published until she had passed away. Maybe she kind of knew. I don't know. Anyway, I hope that you will agree that Harriet deserves to be in our Hall of Fame. And I hope that I've whet your appetite and you're interested to find out more about her. Don't forget to put in the comments if you have anyone else that you think should be in our historical Hall of Fame for people who maybe were autistic. Because I think it's helpful for us to build this idea that autism hasn't just magically appeared. It's been around for a really long time. I'll see you later. Bye.